The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted everyone around the world, but particularly Uyghurs, because from the beginning, as we know from 2017, millions of Uyghurs have been locked in concentration camps. And even throughout COVID, we haven't heard about their conditions. And we know that the conditions inside are extremely horrible. The hygiene is very poor. So it is a breeding ground for a virus to spread. And beyond that, there were also thousands of Uyghur workers who were transferred massively transferred to other Chinese provinces throughout the peak of COVID to work in forced labor factories, providing products and goods to global supply chains. So their lives were very much ignored and looked down on from the very beginning. But in very recent months, Uyghurs have been living in very harsh COVID lockdowns, hundreds days of being interned in their own homes without being allowed to leave, with very limited access to medical care and food as well. And the recent fire in which we have heard from local residents, or at least people have shared that over 40 people have died in that fire because of these lockdowns where people were not allowed, even during that fire, to escape their homes.
Yeah. Do you think this current wave of protest is going to shine a light on the situation for the Uyghur community, or is it being overshadowed a little bit by the fact that this protest movement has spread, more around COVID-0?
It is certainly our hope that it will definitely bring the voices of Uyghurs at the forefront. We are extremely happy to see that there's a massive movement at the moment by protesters all from around the world, but specifically protesters in China, led by students who are standing in solidarity with Uyghurs. But we have to also be careful not to forget about Uyghurs and wonder why there are no Uyghur protesters in the streets. And this is because of the oppression that is going on, the systemic racism and discrimination against the Uyghur people, because they know that if they go in the streets, they will be interned, they will be retaliation against them. So in these protest movements, I hope that we can all remember why Uyghurs are left behind.
Yeah. There had been, before the pandemic, quite a lot of focus on the Uyghurs' position. That does seem to have been overshadowed a little bit. You're in Australia. What are you here hoping to draw attention to?
I'm here in Australia to specifically ask the Australian government, but also policymakers, to take tangible actions to end this ongoing Uyghur genocide. Because Australia is a free democratic state which is actually committed to defending human rights in multilateral spaces such as the UN. But Australia is lagging behind when we compare to countries like Canada, US, and the UK, and even European countries, where we have 9 different parliamentary bodies around the world that have recognized the Uyghur genocide, but Australia is not one of them. And so in this trip, we're hoping to that the Australian government can take concrete actions, and these concrete actions include with the Modern Slavery Act review, having a firm legislation that tackle the issue of modern slavery, but specifically Uyghur forced labor, and recognizing that there needs to be a halt on all imports that are being produced by Uyghur forced labor. The other thing is to also impose Magnitsky-style sanctions on Chinese officials who are being responsible for the ongoing genocide, as the Australian government has recently imposed these sanctions on Russian officials. So these are the very concrete demands that we have asked the Australian government.
How easy is it to follow the supply chain to potential slavery of Uyghurs in these factories, as you say, producing goods?
Of course, supply chains can be very complicated, but at this moment, we're talking about massive crimes. We're talking about international crimes, including genocide and crimes against humanity. And when the ground you're operating on, there are so many red flags, then as a business, you have to start asking questions. You have to be willing to dig a little deeper. And if you are being challenged, then you have to know that, independent audits can cannot exist in the region because workers are not free to speak their minds. And I think we know that, for example, 1 out of 5 cotton garments are produced with Uyghur forced labor, because 84% of China's cotton comes from our region, which is tainted highly with forced labor. And it's the same in the solar industry, for example, with polysilicon, which actually the region is a supplier for the global supply chain. So with all of these indicators, businesses, governments have a responsibility to take tangible action to address and look into these supply chains.
Yeah. Within China, Zumretay, is there a sense of concern about the Uyghur population, or is it complicated for people to necessarily come out? As we know, it's difficult to protest in China and actually bring this issue to light.
Indeed, any forms of expressions, especially political expression, is extremely, it's punished and it's non-existent in China. And so this is why I believe for the past years and decades, people have not been able to speak out in support of Uyghurs. But also, I think there's also the fact that there's a huge disinformation campaign coming directly from the government. But I think in the recent days, we've seen a huge amount of solidarity from different people, including Han Chinese. And I hope that this will bring change and that they come to realization that Uyghurs have been discriminated against on a large scale for the past few years, and that we can come together to end these atrocities.
Yeah. We appreciate you joining us, and thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.